How to stop the program hop. Look, the one thing that gets you making changes with your health is usually the one thing that stops you keeping them long term. And this is a phenomenon you would see in business, you would see in relationships. It's actually fundamentally the same skill set, and it's fascinating seeing this pattern continue to come up. And after working with thousands of clients, the benefit that we have is seeing this pattern so often and being able to address it early can be one of those really big linchpins that is so hard to see otherwise that can make it so much easier for you to stick to something long term, right? We talk about this all the time. It's not just the nutrition and training stuff, but the 3 inches between areas that makes all the difference in making sure that we stick with something long term. And that skill set is I'll give you a couple of examples. So for me in business, I've been self-employed for 15 odd years now, and I started it very much started by being the yes man, right? I would say yes to every opportunity possible because I was underskilled and I didn't know what my focus would be. The funny thing is, so many people now say to me, "Oh, you're so lucky that you found your passion early." I was like, I was completely lost. I just said yes to everything, right? So I did all the things. I was in the startup world. I was hay baling. I was doing the PT stuff. I halfway through a commerce degree, like everything, right? And then once I really uh, found something that was working, that one skill that got me to identify an opportunity that I should pursue is now that one, my biggest risk to that opportunity working long term is the skill I built to find it, which is saying yes to everything. So now, 10 years, 11 years later, going down this health pursuit, I had to say no to everything else for that period of time. And you could imagine there's been so many deals and asks and opportunities that have come across my plate to say, this could be the new next thing, this new sexy thing that's half the work and double the profit and X, Y, and Z, right? Uh, and just building that skill of saying no is the only reason I'm probably still here and you're listening to me on this call. Hopefully, unless nobody's listening to this. But getting to a point where seeing that theme come through in business, I was aware of how often that came through. And Mandy and I have just been talking about how this comes up both in relationships and it comes up in health all the time too, right? In the health space, I've got a couple of friends I know that keep having relationships that last for 2.5 years and they never get past that 3 year point because they think relationship is about the initial feeling, not about the long term routines and date nights and um, different ways of expressing love that happens long term, right? And in health, Mandy, I'll give me some examples potentially of what comes through there. But for me, it's that case of this worked for 3 months and I dropped 5 kilos. And now I've been doing the same thing for another 6 weeks and I only lost 1 kilo. So I'm going to find another thing. Right. And it's this program hopping mentality, which you're better than the person that is just sitting there suffering, not making any change at all. Right. And there's plenty of them. Right. I'm putting weight on, I'm making jokes about it, but really, I'm happy about the position I'm in because I'm just gaining weight and I don't know what to do about it. Those people aren't even willing to ask for help. So you're one step better than that because you're like, okay, I don't know everything. What else out there is there? But I've done keto and I've done vegan and I've done fasting and nothing works. Well, hang on. Each one of those categories allowed you to drop 5 kilos, but then you stopped 6 weeks in and didn't actually embed anything long term. So, Mandy, what is that for you? Obviously, we've talked through this from a behavioral standpoint. What do you see most common?
I think this has really been front of mind for me for, I'd say, a year now, when I read a study which was super interesting, and I think I posted about it back then, and it's about the failure rate basically of every single diet. They all fail at about the 9 month point. That's on average. Some are much earlier, some are much later. So people lose weight till about the 9 month point, then they typically regain it. And it really got me thinking about why this is, in the sense of weight loss in particular. And I think it's this idea that people will do something for a while, they'll get a certain outcome, and then there's always a slowing down. There's always a point at which your return on your investment it still continues to grow, right? But it is, you don't get that initial booster, and you see this with strength training too, right? When you first start strength training, you can gain a lot of muscle and a lot of strength real quickly. And then for your effort, your amount of progress does tend to slow. But if you keep going, it will continue to build. And I think exactly the same with weight loss is that the initial drop that you get kind of lulls you into this false sense of, well, this is what it will always be. And as soon as it's not, you give it up and you try something new, and you give it up and you try something new. And so you just repeat that initial drop many, many times, and never push through the fact that long-term weight loss and weight maintenance are continuing to do the thing that worked and being committed to that process, just like it is in, long-term relationships or any of those sorts of things. We need to stick at it, and it doesn't matter how many different things you try. You have to push through that barrier. And I think maybe that is where it's just not talked about enough in the health space or in the weight loss space in particular, that first initial change you get, super motivating, but it's not the reality of how it goes forever. If it was, imagine you just kind of like whittle away till you're a stick insect and there's nothing left of you.
Yeah, we saw this all the time in the muscle building slash strength training space, right? All the newbies that have just got their certification are like, it's all about progressive overload. I'm like, that's totally fine if you're in the first year of training, right? You can put an extra 1.25 kilo on, every few weeks.
Yeah.
But if you could do that, there'd be people lifting cars on the regular, right? Like it's not really that common
Yeah.
because you get to a point where you lift the bar, then you add the 5, then you add the 10, and then you start to get the 15, and then it takes a little bit longer at whatever weight, right? And eventually, whether you're the Hulk himself or just starting for the first time, you will hit a threshold where there is that drop off, that diminishing return in the efforts you're putting in. And the phrase that Usain Bolt, or a quote that he's been quoted for, hopefully it comes from him, was I've trained for 9 years to shave zero point 0.1 of a second off my 100-meter sprint. You've trained for 4 months and you've given up because you haven't lost 10 kilos, right? And it was just like, it showed that drastic difference between this like long tail of that progression curve, as you said. The first 20% of your effort ends up 80% of your results, right? Like you train for 2 months, you get twice as strong. You're like, this is amazing. I'm going to do this forever. Or you make a change to your nutrition. You go through this new diet and you lose like 10 kilos, i.e. like 60% of it water weight. And you're like, this is amazing. I'm going to be in my goal in like 12 weeks, right? Whereas, as you've just identified, and I think many of you logically know this on the call, is if we're really going to make this happen long term, there's going to be that diminishing return, i.e. now 80% of your results is that last 20% of the effort. And that's the last 20% that nobody does because they just keep repeating the first bit so much over and over again. So yeah, I see that a ton.
I think it highlights a mindset which you kind of drew attention to at the start, which is the first skill set was being able to just say yes to everything, be curious, especially when it comes to health and weight loss. The first skill set is be curious and accept that there's a challenge here. There's something that you're not getting right because you're not getting the results you want. But once you find what you need to do, the skill set becomes that ability to keep doing the thing, even when there's a bit of boredom creeping in, or even when it takes longer than you think it's going to take. And it's an interesting one because I think you have to learn to work past just the dopamine boost of jumping on the scales and seeing the number drop.
Yep.
Instead, the reward is I did the thing I said I was going to do and I feel awesome for that, or my energy's so much better now than it used to be because I regularly get my strength training in or my walking in or my focus on my sleep or whatever. It's looking for those other rewards in the process in order to keep you going, rather than just only being motivated by the dopamine kind of a scale drop. And so it's a whole mindset shift to go from short-term weight loss to long-term weight maintenance.
Yeah, before we dive into the actual skills, I guess, of maintaining those things long term, which we've kind of talked about, but I think you and I talk about program design a lot, right? And the initial 4-month program, I won't use the word perfected, but we're getting close to that point where we know how to nail a 4-month process in order for people to hit initial results and then start to really chew on long-term change. What we ran into probably about 3 years ago at this point was this idea of, cool, people now know the foundations, like they're really set up moving forward. How do we make this more advanced, right? And we give you all the things you need to know, and we dive into things like red light therapies, things like your different seed oils and soy and oxalates and lectins in your food and EMF exposure and X, Y, and Z. There's so many things. And all of the things I've just said are 100% they're important. But it's this idea of going so deep down the rabbit hole that you're more stressed about all the things you can't manage rather than the things that you can do regularly, right? It's like, what's your bare basics that you need to nail every day? And then what's everything that's icing on the cake, right? And I'm sure you've gone through this many, many times yourself, Mandy. You seem to be wired, unfortunately, the same as me. But being in the space where you continue to learn more, right? You go further down the rabbit hole. And we've talked about this before around like the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. But there's always this awareness of like, how the hell am I going to do it all in my day, right? Like, am I going to change every paint in my house? Am I going to make sure that I change all my bedding to this fancy new stuff? Am I going to never have a meal out because it's never just olive oil or coconut oil. Like, where's the line there, right? To make sure that there's a threshold of like, I'm doing the best I can while still living my life. And I think, sleep is a really great example, right? Like, okay, I know that I feel so much better on 8 hours sleep a night, but I want to go out to this barbecue on a Saturday night and enjoy that. And I'm not going to be back by 8:30 so that I can start my nighttime routine. But it's that then mental chatter that comes up because I'm always going to be, my body's always going to be a reflection of my standards in regards of what do I let slip and what don't I. So in order to stay lean, I have to have fundamentally a higher standard for myself in order to strip off those extra kilos and say no to certain foods and say yes to certain activities where I get out and about, right? At a real basic level. Where am I going here? Being able to make sure that you can keep that standard high while also be kind to yourself for the things you can't achieve every single day is a huge part of long-term change. And this is why we've identified the whole, build the no muscle and do boring things for a long period of time. But what I'm actually trying to really fundamentally shift here is this idea of like, I think the biggest thing to being in shape long term is actually being kind to yourself. And that feels so fluffy to say, but it's so true because it's like if you don't have that compassion for your slip ups and you just beat yourself up for them, you feel horrible and you don't want to continue doing it. And what happens when you always feel terrible? Well, you probably binge on food or find some way to escape.
Yeah, yeah. Do you know, there's this thing, this is not a tangent, I promise. There's a common trend seen with people who study nutrition in particular, and that is that they'll get, it's really common to develop food disorders, basically, because you get so deep down the rabbit hole of good, bad, I'm scared of this, I can't do it all. You just get obsessive about it, and it's really common. And I think it's actually something that you just have to work through when you're learning new stuff, right? You have to kind of work through this process of realizing you can't do it all 100% all the time. So what is my minimum standards? And that's, I think, where you have to get curious about when you're weighing up these things, like, yes, I need 8 hours sleep, but I also want to do the social thing. When you're weighing those things up, the only thing you can do is trial and error. How does it feel? Was it negative? Was it a positive or was it a negative? Was it too much or was it, and I think that comes down to food as well. You can say, well, you can't eat 100% perfect all the time. You need to have some self-compassion, but also how often is your self-compassion becoming a cop-out not to do what you actually need to do in order to get the results you actually want? And I think this is the line that we have to learn, right? Of self-compassion is good, but what are the non-negotiables I actually do need to stick to in order to get the result that I want? If you want to be lean and have a decent amount of muscle in your body and all this sort of stuff, there's a certain level of stuff you're going to have to do. You can be as self-compassionate about it as you want, but it's not going to help you get there if you're constantly copping yourself out over it either. So, and I think that's curiosity as much as anything. Well, I feel like it is for me. Like it's finding that line, and some it's taken time. Sometimes you don't hit it, and you're like, no, I could have done more actually this week, and I let myself off the hook. And then sometimes you're like, I maybe didn't enjoy that week as much as I could have because I actually pushed too hard and I didn't actually need to, and it was a negative, even though I did quote unquote all the good things. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's very intangible, that isn't it? Maybe it's fluffy.
No, I think I guess the biggest thing I take away from that is the interconnectedness of all three, right? If you're having a shit day at work, it's going to impact how you fuel your body, right? You get to decide how far that goes, right? Don't use it as scapegoat and like, work with shit, give me the ice cream, right? Like being able to manage that state. The reason I bring it up is if you are in that space where you've got a really hostile environment at work, or you're just feeling stressed or anxious or whatever all of the time, you're in a state where fundamentally your body's in survival mode. So the way that you start to act in regards to your health tends to be a little bit more primitive because you're a lot more focused on survival than you are this sort of ascension of your six-pack abs, right? Like it's just less of a focus. And I think being able to integrate these, hence why this podcast is genuinely tied into relationships and business and career as much as possible, because we work with a ton of busy professionals and we see that they care about their work and care about providing for their families and all these things. But unless that's addressed at the same level and in combination and complementary to the health changes, it always feels like a disconnect, right? And I think we've talked about this a lot before, but what you're bringing up with this whole idea of compassion as well is if we're constantly creating a gap and creating fundamentally our own stress around what we're doing right now and what we think we should be doing, then we make it so much worse. So I do think that sort of, yeah, at least what you've said, it integrates the things for me. And I know that the weeks that um, are a bit more full on, I'm not pushing my body at the same level, because I don't try work in isolation of that, health goal. It's going to ebb and flow with business. And there's weeks that are frustrating because I'm like, I want to improve this area of my health, but like I'm really required in that space. But I know that survival, or a baseline of improvement in business is a more important run than six-pack abs, right?
Yeah.
So I know that it's going to take over, and I think that awareness of, so many coaches being like, well, it needs to be a priority for you. Like, fuck off. Like, there's so many things that need to be put in place in order for you to set your health up properly. The trouble is, there's so many people out there that are trying to say, save me, right? Improve my health. Yet the rest of their life, they're not putting those anchors in place, right? And this is a bit of a hard convo, but noticing the amount of times people want this drastic change in their physical health, but they haven't held a job for more than 6 months. They're having, weekly, if not daily, arguments with their partner, whatever it might be, right? Like, that stuff is real tough. And I'm not the expert in that area, but I am at least a promoter of having those hard conversations, either with yourself or others, that need to be had. Because if these aren't being had, and you're now trying to work in your health in isolation, well, that really runs into some real issues, right? And I think potentially this is where if we come back to what we're actually talking about, being the first 20%, is really easy to achieve versus the last 80%. Is the first 20%, you can kind of put your life in a vacuum and do anything for 6 months or 2 months, whatever it might be. But as soon as this becomes less of a new novel idea and something, if you're actually going to do long term, i.e. it's December, not January, you need to realize how that's going to integrate into other areas, right? Because I think that idea of eventually those seasons of life are going to catch up to you. And if you're not managing them alongside health, it will very much kick you in the ass.
And it's that the fact that we can hold on for a short amount of, anyone can hold on for a short amount of time and do that first part.
Yep.
The next bit is that the longer you go, the more you're going to bump up against your own personality, your own issues. And I think a way of kind of looking at that is what you said before as well. Say you're going on a trip, is luxury flying first class, drinking a whole lot of free wine on the way and then feeling like crap when you get there? Or luxury making the choices that aren't like that, and you get to wherever you're going feeling awesome so you can have a great time. And it's that lens through which we measure the thing. And I think the same with self-compassion. If you've had a stressful day at work, is self-compassion going home and drinking more beer than you would have drunk on a Thursday night and just blobbing in front of the TV? Or is it going for a walk on the way home so you actually feel good again? Both of those things achieve the same outcome, where you feel you can shift your state, but one of them's a positive and one of them's a negative. So it's the lens through which you kind of interpret self-compassion becomes the thing that either moves you forward or not.
Yeah.
I think as we go deeper into this, we constantly have to bump up to our old habits. Our old habits might have been this, but I want to replace it with this, and this is going to become my new thing.
Yeah. So let's bring this a bit more personal too. Like you mentioned before, and I actually hadn't shone light on this as much as you did just then, which is this idea of like a lot of nutritionists that end up with those eating disorders. Like you've obviously gone down all the rabbit holes of nutrition for a really long time. What's your personal approach or threshold or little reminder to yourself when you get a little bit too stuck down that space? Or has it just not happened for you? Or what's your personal experience?
No, it definitely has. I've gone through all of the different things through my years of like herbal medicine training and then nutrition training and all of that. I've gone full down the plant-based kind of route, and I've gone down all of these different guilt-inducing, basically rules around food, and then back out the other side, and then you can go down the pesticides thing, and you can get yourself in quite a state of stress over all the things that you can't actually control in our food environment and food availability and all of that. And I think it has actually taken a little bit of time, but pulling away from it and coming back to the basics has been the best thing that I've ever been able to do for myself. And you say this all the time, nothing complex works until you nail the basics, right? Nothing fancy works until you nail the basics. So there's no point worrying about the organics. There's no point worrying about the food additives. There's no point worrying about this, that, or the other thing, or all these little micro details until you're at least meeting your biological needs. Are you eating enough energy? Are you moving enough? Are you sleeping enough? Are you getting enough protein? Are you eating some vegetables in your day? If you're not doing those things, all of those other things are just distractions that pretty much make you feel guilty, confused, and overwhelmed and stressed. So they're a net negative to your health. So I think it's just always pulling people back to what can you do right now? What can you actually control? Are you hitting these? And this is why in our one of our squad calls in our first part of Body Reset, we go through this checklist. At this point, you're probably coming up to all of these different struggles and things that are trying to drag your attention away. But are you doing this? Are you doing this? And are you doing this? Because these are the basics that you need to be able to hold in place over the long term in order to achieve that result. And yeah, it's kind of like an anchor, really. It pulls you back out of the silliness that your head can go into, or social media can take you into.
Yeah. No, I resonate with that a ton. That story reminded me of when I was literally just out of uni and sort of working on the side, not making a lot of money, just covering rent type thing. And because I was trying to improve my health and very much like put muscle on all these things, I was spending like ridiculous money on like gluten-free, like quinoa pastas and things that were like $10 a box, right? Rather than buying like kilos for like $2. And that was just, I guess, a key example of when you said like, are you meeting your basic needs? Well, my basic needs at that time were rent and like making sure that I knew if I had a job in 6 months. So trying to obsess around, oh, well, this one has slightly less oxalates in it is going to be detrimental, certainly at 22 or whatever it was, right? So being able to get clear on that sort of hierarchy of needs, I think is actually a really nice way to look at it, because I think this, and we've talked about this with our coaches literally just last week, right? Around the idea of if you're in a spot where you're like, hey, I'm in a season of my life where I finally got my career and my family to a point that like things are going great, but I want to get my health back in my side, right? My kids are leaving home or my business is not requiring me 10 hours a day. I want to get my health back in my side. Well, that becomes an amazing spot to be like, cool, what do I need to do? This is where I need to raise my hand and say, I don't know everything, and make a change. The trouble is, I see a lot of people that are like their whole life has disrupted, right? They've just gone through a divorce. They've just lost their job. They've just done X, Y, and Z. Now, that can easily be a season, a bit of a shakeup. I'm absolutely not saying that that's not a time to change your health, but I think having that space of going through your hierarchy of needs, have I got that safety and security covered? Have I got my financial needs at least baseline, right? It doesn't need you to be prosperous and completely financially free in order to improve your health, but you do want to make sure you're covering next week's rent, right? Once we've got that stuff right, we realize that we're not in that constant survival state of, okay, well, what's that next step for us, right? And it becomes a nice little ladder of, okay, well, I can start towards adding a little bit more protein in. Can I cover that, making sure that I'm digesting and I'm able to sleep well and all these things? Because if there is that outside stress coming through, you're not going to be sleeping well to start with, and your digestion's not going to be great either because you're worried about all these things going on.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because often if we bring this entirely to weight loss, for example, you can make some changes right at the start, right? You can hold on to those and you can get that initial weight drop, and then it may stop working. But if you've lost your job or something massive changes in your world at that same time, you're also dealing with that. Your body is also dealing with that. It doesn't know the difference between the stress of that and the stress of something else. It just feels this higher state of stress. And when you're stressed more, you've got this higher cortisol. When your cortisol's high, you get higher blood sugar and you've got higher insulin. You've got all this stuff working against the weight loss goal that you've got. And it's easy to slip into that trap of thinking, well, this isn't working. But actually, it still is working. It's just that there's something else that's a higher priority for your body at the moment, and that needs to be addressed first. And being able to continue doing those foundational things. I'm going to protect these foundational things, even though I'm not seeing the scale go down like I was, but I'm going to protect these while I deal with this other big thing. It's actually okay. That's the seasonality of it.
I like that we've gone this way, because, let's circle right back to where we've talked about the relationship thing, right? The friend that keeps hitting the 2.5 year mark and then has to find a new girlfriend because it's not working out, right? And if you've done that cycle, 6, 7 times, I don't think it's the girlfriend, it's probably you. And I see this in business happening at the same time as well. I've got a couple of guys that have hopped on a new opportunity, built up to a certain level, hit a threshold that's too hard to fix, then find a new opportunity and build up to the same threshold, right? And they keep finding quote unquote better opportunities, but they keep stopping at the same point. Now, that exact same thing happens in health, right? So we're identifying those 3 key areas of life, really, right? You've got your relationships, you've got your work, and you've got your health. And that fundamentally is a skill set shortage, whether relationships, and you keep hitting that 2.5 years, etc., is you, no matter what diet you follow, you are going to hit that same threshold until you work through that next problem, right? Is you're able to build up to that level of business until you realize that the new skill set is not marketing more, it's hiring great people, etc. If
Yeah.
it's no longer intimacy, but it's making sure that you can have a great date night and ask those sort of deeper connection questions, right? That might get you past that 3 year mark.
Mm.
In health, it might be not trying to find the new way to get into a deficit for a very short period of time, but actually looking at changing your mentality away from just losing weight the whole time to where am I getting stronger? Where am I building that metabolic rate? How am I making myself healthy? Right. And I've definitely seen that to be an obsession with people that are program hopping, program hopping, because
Yes.
they tend to go from program to program. How am I going to lose weight? How am I going to lose weight? Right. And as soon as they hit that threshold again, where they're 6 weeks in, they've lost the same 8 kilos again, or whatever it might be, how do we make sure that we really build something long term? Is okay, how do I focus on what I build long term? And I think this is where going through certain injuries with my shoulders, I have actually seen this mindset change a lot for me. But for me, early on, I didn't have a lot of issues dropping body fat because I was so focused on building muscle, which is so metabolically expensive to build that I was just burning body fat as a byproduct, right? And my I was going to say girlfriend at the time, but she's my wife now. She used to say, like, it's so annoying. You'll eat a pizza and you'll drop weight tomorrow. And it's like, well, I've been training pretty hard the whole week. It was that glycogen that I just wasn't giving my body, right? And she's gone through that change herself, right? Where she was that classic, not program hopper, but trying to drop body fat the whole time. And then she was like, oh, I really understand this weight training thing and contracting and getting strong and actually enjoying this, like picking up a deadlift with 60 kilos on it or 100 kilos on it. It's really cool, you know. And getting her to a place that she was able to at least just let go of weight loss for a period of time, not even look at the scales, just not even worry about it, and just focus on getting strong. And provided she was mindful of how she was eating, she's like, oh, look at that! Like, I actually feel way leaner, right? I feel I'm fitting clothes differently, etc. And I think that is fundamentally for a lot of people that shift from, look, because you're only focused on losing weight, that's the one reason you aren't losing weight. Is like, what are you gaining? Where are you getting stronger? How are you fueling and nourishing the body? Otherwise, fundamentally, you're back in that survival space.
Yeah. Because weight loss ultimately is a short-term goal. It's in it, and it's very myopic in the sense that it's just this one thing. But I think the bigger question is, what does it actually mean to you? And I read this quote the other day, and I know I'm going to butcher it, but it's basically when you don't know where you're heading, every distraction looks like an opportunity.
Yeah.
And I think this is exactly what happens, right? With weight loss, you have this, I've got this goal of weight loss, but what does that actually mean to you? Like, what happens when you get it? If you understand that, you won't program hop because you'll start looking for those other things. But if it's just, well, I'm not seeing the scale go down anymore, so I'll try something else. Not seeing the scale go down, so try something else. But if you actually shift that to, amazing, the scale's gone down, it has slowed down, it's continuing to go, but I also get feeling stronger, feeling leaner, I'm sleeping better, because the ultimate goal is to feel amazing and live long, not just to see the scale number go down, which really means nothing. It keeps your focus rather than just being distracted by all these possibilities, because there's a million ways to skin a cat, right?
If I was to ask you what feeling healthy feels like for you, what would be your top 3 kind of words, I guess, for
that? Mental clarity would be one. Joy, that's a fluffy word, but that's in the sense of you actually just feel good on a day-to-day basis. You don't feel negative or grumpy or whatever. And then strong, probably.
Yeah. Like, for me, I agree with all of those. Mental clarity is actually bigger in there than you initially expect. It's not the first word you bring in, but the more you think about it, and certainly the more clients we talk to, like, cognition and mental clarity as we age is like a bigger and bigger focus, right? But strong, fit, and I would actually say lean, but it's like that sort of that tightness, that feeling of just being like, I fit clothes really well.
Yeah.
Had that feeling yesterday. I had just a shirt hadn't worn in a while. I was like, I feel good in this. It's a great feeling, I must say. But where did I go here? If you ask someone that's on that program hopping the whole time, those aren't the questions, because they're focused on the scale weight. Like, oh no, healthy for me is 80 kilos. Healthier for me is not having a flabby arm. 80 kilos is getting into that old dress. Like, all these things, right? Maybe not dress for me, but that dress I don't fit anymore. Damn it. Yeah. But getting to a place where golly, I've lost my train of thought. Yeah, being able to know that it's an attribute that you're building towards and something that really makes you feel excited to get to that place, right? It does become
Mhm.
that identity or that overall something that you encapsulate. And I think until you feel like that's something you're working towards, right? We've talked about this plenty of times, but rather than something that you're running away from, something you're running
Yeah.
towards. So if you're listening to this right now, I'd love for you to have a little think like, what's three words that really describe health for you right now? And have a little think about what those words are. Are they seen through a positive light of something that you get to do, or is it something you no longer have to do, right? A lot of people are motivated by like being able to finally sit in the airplane chair, right? Or finally be able to get the old pair of pants on. While the both great goals, and certainly I've seen plenty of people make great change initially, they put that weight back on unless they shift that goal to now I want to get to a bodyweight deadlift, or now I want to do this activity. I want to hike with my daughter up a hill, whatever it might be, right? Like that transition happens and it becomes a lot more meaningful to things changing. So have a little think. And a little bonus step for you here would be send me a message on Instagram. Hollywood NZ, I think is the thing. Just send me a message on Instagram and say, hey, listen to your podcast. Here are my top three health words, right? And I'd love to hear them. One, are we going down the right track here? And two, it gets you to really think about them. When you write them down, I think is a bit more meaningful as well. So please do that. I'd love for you to think about what those keywords are for you because it will allow you to go through this whole discussion. Maybe even listen to the podcast again if you need to, but the ability to identify, am I motivated by pain? Am I motivated by opportunity, by what's next? And if you're ever going to really maintain this journey long term without continually hopping from program to program and never really getting past that same threshold point, I think this is such a great little experiment to try with yourself, and I'd love to hear your answers too. So, team, we're going to jump on another call, but that was hopefully a good chat. I enjoyed it, and I think being able to dive deeper into that space of just the mindfulness, hence why we've kind of gone down this whole route. We can change all of the fancy things nutritionally for you, but if we keep sabotaging our own thought process around how we view ourselves and being able to just feel okay at 80%, be excited about the changes, and no matter how small they are, because we've been doing it for a decade, but you know what the alternative is, and you feel so much better being down this path instead of the other one. I think it's worth doing. So, yeah, shoot me that message. I'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, we'll see you next week.